right, I am Bree Mills, and this is my presentation for the final exam for mammalogy this semester. So question one talked about cetaceans and differences between the suborders. So first I want to talk about Mysticeti, which is, it translates to mouse whale. And these whales are unique in that instead of teeth, they have baleen, which are these keratinous structures which descend from the roof of the mouth and act as a filter. So these whales, to ingest their prey, will just take a large gulp of usually a school of fish, plankton, krill, things like that. And then the baleen will filter out the water while keeping the prey in the whale's mouth, so that they can then be ingested. And these whales do not echolocate, which is unlike the other suborder of cetaceans, which is Odontoceti. So these are your toothed whales. They are capable of echolocation, and part of that is due to the presence of these organs like the melon in bottlenose dolphins and the spermaceti organ in the sperm whale. One species I don't think gets enough credit is the Amazon river dolphin. So these are freshwater dolphins that inhabit the rivers of the Amazon rainforest, just like the name implies. One interesting fact about them is that they're born gray, but they turn pink as they mature. And they are the largest of the freshwater dolphins. They also are unique in that they have a neck that allows their head to move 180 degrees, and this allows for hunting of prey in underwater branches and roots. I also find it very interesting that in Amazonian folklore, these dolphins, which are locally known as botos, are said to be magical shapeshifters. It's believed that these dolphins at night will leave the river, turn into handsome human men, attract human women, and possibly have offspring. The biggest caveat being that they have to make it back to the river by morning when they turn back into dolphins. And you can tell if you're talking to a boto because they will have a white hat that covers their apparent blowhole in the transformation. And just a personal note about these species, the picture there is of Chuckles, the Amazonian river dolphin who lived at the Pittsburgh Zoo. He lived to be 43 years old. And became the oldest of his species in captivity. And he was a family favorite growing up. We love to go to the zoo to see Chuckles. In regards to the second question about human-wildlife conflict in India, I have to admit that prior to this presentation, I had not fully appreciated the human costs to human-wildlife conflict. I had obviously known about economic loss and things like that, especially in regards to agriculture. But until this presentation, I think living on the East Coast where there are no large predators has really afforded me kind of a protection from this human-wildlife interaction can lead to human fatalities, which obviously in India, you can't necessarily avoid that when you have so many large animals that are threatening to human life. And I also think this presentation really helped me appreciate the low amount of economic compensation, especially in a developing country like India. I would have thought that maybe there might be a little more understanding in regards to these things, since they're probably a little more focused heavily on agriculture than we are here. Something I found interesting as well when we were discussing the first case study about farmers watching the tea plantations for elephant activity, especially at night, I was wondering about if this model could be applied to other agricultural areas, especially agricultural areas where elephants are more of a threat to the agricultural product than the tea plantations. And I also wondered, would farmers volunteer their time or preferably, right, have some kind of compensation to monitor a field for elephant activity to keep agricultural losses from happening? I just feel like that personal connection to their crops might drive them to embrace something like that. As a personal relation to this material, I found human wildlife conflict interesting for years. I worked at a wildlife rehabilitation center as a teenager. I saw a lot of it. And as I went through college and became an animal scientist, I especially grew to appreciate wildlife conflict in terms of agriculture. However, this presentation certainly gave me a new appreciation for the work of those who try to mitigate wildlife-human conflict and just how nuanced the problem is. So I found this presentation really interesting and I really enjoyed it. For question 3, talking about primates, I was going to discuss the northern white-cheeked gibbon. So one of the biggest notes about this species is the noted sexual dimorphism, especially in the pelage. So young gibbons and males are black with white cheeks, but females as they age will develop this much more blonde pelage as seen in the picture. They are among the largest hylobatids with unusually long arms. They are second only to siamangs in relative size. And these long arms just make them awesome for brachiating through the trees. It's just really amazing to watch them move, especially through limbs of trees. They also have the heaviest body and limb proportions, which allows for power in their shoulder, hip, and knee motions. And again, this helps for brachiating and leaping through the trees. One quote I found by a naturalist that I thought was relevant to the gibbons and wanted to note was that he said they progress like gymnasts by means of their long and powerful arms and throw themselves from one branch to another for distances of 30 feet or more. And I think that really captures the awe that you can have when watching a gibbon move through the trees. It's just a really great example of adaptation and forward meeting function. They're amazing to watch. So this species of gibbon is found in Vietnam and mainly in Laos. There was a Chinese population, but it is believed that population has since gone extinct. In Vietnam, it's believed that they may consume about 90 to 100% fruit for their diet. However, this was an older study that was only done on 6 individuals, so I'm skeptical. I feel like there's a lot of limitations there. However, it's also been noted that while fruit is preferred, they've also been known to consume leaves, buds, flowers, and smaller animals. For their social structure, they live in pair bond groups consisting of one male, one female, and their offspring. And the pair bonds are stable and last lifelong. So this is a very rare example of monogamy in nature. And then, as I said, they're found in northwestern Vietnam, northern Laos, and southwestern China. But the China population, unfortunately, is believed to have gone extinct in the early 2000s. In regards to current research for this species, there's been a lot of look at possible handedness, especially in leaping from limb to limb in the trees is there a preferred hand that touches the limb first? And they also have been looking heavily at habitat utilization and true distribution for this species, especially with the loss of the China subpopulation. There's been a lot of focus on how many of these individuals are actually in the wild and what threats are being posed to them. Which leads us into their conservation status. They are critically endangered. Their main threats are hunting, deforestation, and the wildlife trade. It should be noted, though, this was really interesting to me, that in Laos, it used to be taboo to hunt gibbons due to their human likeness, and it was believed that gibbons actually represent spirits that would take revenge on hunters if they were killed. Again, just a personal note about this species, the gibbon pictured here is May. She was one of the gibbons who lived at the Pittsburgh Zoo. She lost her arm due to an infection from a bite from her mate, but she got around just fine, which for a species that relies so heavily on their extended forearms for movement, just watching her move, it was amazing. She really adapted to only having one arm. As for the watercraft noise in marine mammals, so just setting up the problem, well, there's been many studies investigating the effect of watercraft generated noise on marine mammals. There's been little consensus on the impacts. And I think that this review really highlighted that there were a wide range of studied species, habitats, vessels, and impacts. No one really came to a consensus on how do we look at this. And I think that is very interesting. So the most studied species included accessible species such as humpback whales, bottlenose dolphins, belugas, and a majority of the vessels studied had an ecotourism association, which I also found really interesting. And then just to preface the effects that these craft have on cetaceans, I wanted to talk about the Lombard effect, which is a proposed explanation for changes in spectral features of vocalizations that compensate for masking of communication. And that masking of communication can usually be a loud or a noise, ambient noise, which is probably pretty constant at the same range as those communications. And this can lead to an increase in source level, vocalization rate, and frequency of vocalizations. So looking at the effect of watercraft noise on Mysicetes, Mysicetes specialize in low-frequency communication, which low-frequency communication is also admitted by large cargo ships. So these authors listed several examples of changes in Mysicetes communication. So they talked about humpback whales in Glacier Bay National Park. They talked about right whales possibly adapting by changing their frequency. Beards and minke whales decreased their communication range, and fin whales had lowered their bandwidth, peak frequency, and center frequency of vocalizations. In terms of Odontocetes, these animals specialize in high frequency communication, which is not only admitted by commercial ships, but also by personal watercraft. And like the Mysicetes, these animals have really adapted to changing how they vocalize to get around this constant ambient noise. So sperm whales displayed fewer clicks recorded during a vessel pass. Dolphins alter whistle characteristics, and what I found interesting too is the metabolic rates of dolphins increase with sound production. So between a change in sound production and physically trying to leave the area, there's a large metabolic cost to dolphins caused by watercraft noise. And then harbor porpoises experienced decreased communication ranges. As for the Saurians, communication effects remain uninvestigated, but boat collisions are a great concern. The current hypothesis indicates that since these species spend a lot of time at the water's surface, the received noise level from watercraft is likely due to source interference and less sound radiation. And therefore, with this kind of double sound interference and their slow speeds, this could lead to boat collisions. They might not even know the boat is there until it's too late. As for pinnipeds, a majority of studies focused on vessel presence, not necessarily the sound emitted by the vessel. But there is a potential for sound to mask or alter communication like cetaceans. And they discussed the gray seals vocalizing in ranges that are similar to passenger ships, and harp seals actually decreasing the intensity of their calls with vessel presence. Research needs, there's a lot in this area, and I'm excited to kind of follow this and see where the future of this research goes. I think it's very interesting. So they want to expand the number of species that are accounted for in studies like these. However, this is just a problem with studying marine mammals in general. They're not usually easily accessible. Utilizing Antarctic waters, while gas and oil may have at one time have been a concern in the Antarctic, it's actually now tourism and fishery. So seeing how these effects lead to increased noise in the Antarctic, I think will be very interesting. And utilizing developing country waters, these authors talked a lot about how there's a lack of studies about rivers, and the noise that river watercraft may emit and how this might affect animals like freshwater dolphins. there's a lot of missing research on small personal watercraft like jet skis, so that's also an area in which to investigate. And then, while it's assumed that the animals will leave area, this is not always true. So the types of impacts that these vessels could have on these animals are actually wide-ranging and largely uninvestigated. And this is my references for my questions, and this is my references for my photos.